Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, and welcome to Family Office TV. I'm also the founder and CEO at SFO Continuity and Family Office Masterclass. For those of you that see this, I am back from my journey to Europe, primarily to Austria. It was great. More to follow on that. Follow my social media and some of my programs. It was an immersive and an amazing learning experience, but it's great to be back home for the holidays. This is wonderful. Very excited about today. Neuro Performance Secrets for the Rising Generation. It features Andy Murphy. Andy is a world-leading neuro performance expert who for 21 years has developed cutting-edge protocols by working with the best in sports, in health, in online and finance, and royalty. And I just came back from Europe. Well, perfect timing. And now is focusing his passion, listen to this, my family office folk, on the next generation, what I may define as the rising generation, to assist them at their peak performance. During, I might add, the greatest transfer of wealth. I have some little different opinions about that, but let's run with that so they can create, and who wouldn't want this, an incredible future for us all. Andy Murphy. Andy, welcome to the show.
My pleasure, and thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited. I've watched some of your podcasts, and I love your interview style and the different types of people that you got on. And you've definitely got a wealth of knowledge in the family office space, my friend.
You're very kind. I still have a lot to learn, and I can't say that I have a wealth of knowledge in your industry, but I've always been intrigued by enhancing performance by neurocognitive capability, executive function. I have interviewed what some people will call prominent people like Tony Robbins and others. So I've been very, very fortunate. So I am definitely a student. I love to learn. I'm naturally curious. And sometimes I do push certain boundaries. And I think this is an intriguing subject, which absolutely is impactful to families and to family offices. So given the setup of the rising generation of the greatest transfer of wealth over the coming years to decades, you're correct. This is an intriguing time.
Yes.
Given that it's neurocognitive, to me, this takes me back to some of the work that I have done on executive function. And maybe from your perspective, neurocognitive executive function, what does that mean to you and why should we care?
I love your question already, my friend. I love it. Do you know what? It comes from so much experience looking at so many different types of industries and looking in thousands of people's high performance brains. The reason is we need to be one thing, and that is in control of our mind, our emotions, our peak state, or the version of us. And that leads to our behaviors. And most people these days are in, the big word is everyone's in a state of anxiety, right? The world is anxiety. But the truth is behind this, I think we're just in a ever-changing, dramatically evolving world. And that means it's uncertain. And when things are uncertain, what happens is the fight or flight response, or the amygdala in our brain, lights up. And it really is just an alarm system making sure that we are safe. But what people do is they treat that as that the thing wrong, everything's in danger. And so they allow anxiety to really start leading their decision making. And that causes conflict. It causes miscommunication, which is what's happening, I believe, with the existing generation and the next generation. But the truth is, what we have to really do is learn how to condition our brain, our nervous system, and control our brain chemistry. If we can do those three things, then what it allows us to do is to be our best, at our best, and communicate and perform at our best, no matter what the situation is going on. And I always go back to Ray Dalio's quote. I attribute as much of my success to what I've learned about the brain as I do to my understanding of economics and investing. And that, for me, when we look at someone like Ray Dalio in the investment world, it's really what I believe is the difference that makes the difference in how the next generation is really going to find their own identity take this wealth and actually grow the world rather than just spending what the fortunes that they've been given. Does that make sense?
Yes, I liked how you used the word to effectively to utilize the capital. We could argue for the sake of good, which I think is good. I thought you were actually going to say use the wealth to grow the wealth more. And for some, where that is important to them, and probably money should never be your driving purpose. And we may get to purpose and things like that later, but that would have been a little bit of a moment where I might have went, ooh. That being said, if for some reason that is your purpose in building businesses and growing, and the byproduct is you get richer, I can't say there's anything wrong with that.
No.
What I do want to go into is you used the word a couple of times, anxiety. When I was growing up, and I'm not a young guy, there wasn't talk of ADHD, of anxiety. I'm sure there were elements of it, but now no young person is not familiar with that term. Probably very few have not themselves or their parents considered to be evaluated or possibly medicated for it. And I want to be a little careful what I say here, but there's a segment of the population and or quote unquote among the sexes where, from what I heard, maybe it's exaggerated or wrong, but something like a third or might have been 40% of people over 40 are effectively on some sort of anxiety medication. Now, I left off one or two key facts there. Let me be a little bit more careful and frugal with that. But what's going on here? Is the world that much more dangerous? Are people that much more afraid? Or compared to as tribes a long time ago, how we received information, but now we have radio, we have TV, we have social media, we have the rise of the iPhone in 2008 and mobile devices that have things like TikTok, Instagram, and others, admittingly, that I do use, but we have lots of information, often wrong information, coming at us. Society is making us this way, but we probably shouldn't use that as an excuse.
I completely and absolutely agree with you. There is, if we look back, everyone talks about the world being in chaos right now, but if we look back through history, has the world never not been in chaos? Has there never not been wars? Has there never not been empires being built and failing? No, it's right. Human beings are human beings, right? It's just that I believe personally that the pharmaceutical industry got behind a lot of this work, and they put labels on things and to make sales, right? But the truth is there is definitely a lot of stress in the world. Let's use that word. And people are really learning how to handle that stress. But the stress has always been there, right? Nothing's really changed. It's just that we have probably more awareness or tools than we've ever had. But going back to your point, Angelo, with social media, what the social media really have worked out through spending billions of dollars, that one of the motivating factors for people to take action or click on social media is a brain chemical called dopamine, right? So dopamine isn't a reward chemical, which is what they used to think. It's actually, neuroscience has shown over the last X amount of years through studies that it's actually the build-up to motivation. It's the motivation chemical. It's actually what allows us to take action. So we're always constantly dopamine driven. And the problem with social media is that we are on a constant dopamine high and dopamine crashes. So we're on this constant roller coaster. And what social media have done, and not just social media, but like even YouTube and misinformation, dopamine's created through something, well, it's novelty. It's new. This novelty could be a negative or it could be a positive. It could be a self-sabotage pattern, or it could be an abundance frame. So we could grow our businesses with it, or we can use it to self-destruct. Either way, what our brain craves for is dopamine. So the social media have got a hold of this, and often you might not use social media much, and I use it less and less these days, Angelo, but it's funny, isn't it? We come off social media and within a few seconds, there's a little impulse in us to maybe even click on it again, or we end up finding ourselves scrolling through it. So what we end up becoming is dopamine addicted. We're constantly craving for this search of dopamine, which in a world of misinformation or information, then it means if a new concept comes out, it doesn't mean it's the correct concept. It just means that people like new and they can spread that information. And that can be very damaging in actual economics, in the global economics of what's happening. Because do we really, truthfully know what's happening? Well, we don't, because where is the true information coming from? But everybody loves the shiny and new.
Wow. I mean, I think you really nailed it, again, from my perspective, which I kind of led a little bit into.
Sure.
I pride myself on having good emotional regulation, of not needing validation from others, but I fall prey. The rare times I may go on TikTok and the more common times I go on Instagram, probably the two most common platforms for relatively the younger audiences, especially TikTok, if you're under 21. And there is a validation from likes to your story, to your post, comments that are positive. I guess it's just how our brain is wired. Now, we could really go back into a real deep evolutionary biology and all that. I guess we have the back of the brain, the amygdala, that is more primitive, more reptilian, that is more based on instinctive. But what makes us, I guess, as humans unique is more of our prefrontal cortex, the ability for critical thinking, the ability of emotional intelligence. But with a new form of media that we haven't adapted to, which really is so new in the grand scheme of things, we have all this information, often misinformation, coming at us that, one, it's, I could argue it's controlling the minds of the young ones, but maybe not quite the conversation for today. But if nothing else, it does challenge what I said before on executive function. And one of the things in executive function is the ability to have a strong working memory to hold, manipulate, and connect information. But when you're younger and your brain's not evolved and you don't have the experience and all this is coming at you, that does become very hard to do.
Yes, it becomes very dangerous. It becomes very dangerous in many different ways. And we talk about the wealth transfer. And this is a real passion of mine, because what I've worked with in the past is so many different types of industries, as I say, from world champion athletes to world-class traders to Hollywood producers and actors, to all of these different types of people. And the truth is, Angelo, what I've found is human beings are quite similar. You know, it doesn't matter what pursuit or career we're doing, we kind of respond the same way. Often we all have traumas to whatever level, to whatever degree. We all kind of drive. The emotion behind us is always kind of driving our behavior, and that's what we have to fundamentally get control of. So the challenge is, if we're always getting a constant flood of this brain chemical or new information, we kind of lose our own identity. And then what you spoke about before was tribes. So then we look at our outdated genetics of Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number being roughly about 150 people that's actually changed now in later studies. But the original study was 150 people that we actually know the names and faces of before we start to become overloaded, which is outside of tribe, right? And when we have millions of people or hundreds of thousands, or we're scrolling through, we kind of go away from knowing ourselves. And unfortunately, what happens is people try to be like somebody else because, like you spoke about before, we're always looking for external validation, or not everybody, but that happens when we have traumas or insecurity. We're constantly striving for external validation to make ourselves feel good or valued about ourselves. But the danger with that is people are losing who they truly are. And I think back in the day with business, it was much more difficult to actually start businesses. It was much more difficult to actually find the knowledge of what business was. And so I think with the next generation, there's so much more opportunity online to create these different businesses. Not all of them are good businesses. So like you spoke about before, they could be squandering money. They could be wasting it on other things, but there's so much more opportunity to get this external validation, which takes people away from the truth of understanding who they are. And what I talk about with this conflict, and I really believe it's a miscommunication between the existing founders and the next gen, is that it's such a cultural vast difference in that world and the new world, if you want to call it. And the old school world is done incredibly well, obviously, right? And it's to do with, it was always externally driven to create greatness. Well, the new generation, whether it's through, again, whether it's misinformed or whether it's the right way, they become internally focused to create greatness. But both generations, they want the same thing. They want to be the best they can be. And whatever medium they do to get there. The challenge becomes, if we're being constantly flooded with dopamine from all of these different areas, it takes a lot more work to discover who you really are. And that can be self-destructive.
Interesting. So you used the word also emotions. I was going to bring that up.
Yes.
I guess emotions are a part of the human experience, and they probably serve a biological purpose. I do understand that. And I'm not saying it's always perfect to be so stoic. Although I do think there are advantages to calming your mind, to regulating your feelings, and helping. Again, what makes us different than Neanderthals, than animals, is our prefrontal cortex and our ability for critical thinking, for reasoning. But emotions should not be so quickly to be honored. Could I make the point that we form biases, we form convictions that we hold on to because you want to assume that we're right?
Yes.
Conviction coupled with emotions, that could be a very deadly and very dangerous combo. Maybe not literally, although perhaps it could be. But in terms of, there are points in our life when our ability to make critical decisions and hopefully make the right decision is very, very important. And that may need to be adapted. I understand nothing stays the same forever. Like a good poker player, you adapt to the changing conditions around you and the changing hand that you're dealt. You do not control everything. But to let your emotions get hold of you, and to let convictions that are no longer accurate or true from how the world works to how many things work. Like, how do we learn how to better self-regulate, to not get stuck in biases that are going to be negative for us, and to not let our emotions control us?
I love it. These are great questions. And you bring up such valid things. And you're right. You shouldn't ever be reacting off emotion. You know, that's like a professional athlete going into a game or a match and then running off their emotion. They're going to be not in their peak state. And that's where I'm going to next. So what happens is, if we understand that there are, how to look at this. Okay, we have different versions of ourselves. So the version of us, or the state, so the working state, say the business version of you or the sales version of you, is very different to the family version or the relaxing version or the traveling version, right? They're all different neurological networks that are built up and conditioned. And what I mean by conditioning is that we understand through neuroplasticity that the brain is very malleable. But the brain is also, the deeper it works very much like a muscle. Let's go there. So it works very much like a muscle. So if I am building this version of me all day, like I'm dominantly focused on business, for example, the stresses and strains that I bring from business start creating messy wiring into the rest of our life if we don't know how to change states. So inside each state or each hat or each role that we put on, we have different perspectives around the world, different language we speak to ourselves and other people, different values, different expectations, different beliefs, right? And the only thing we should know about beliefs is that, well, they're not real. Beliefs
Yes.
are only, right? Beliefs are only true with the information we have at the time. So what we need is something called behavioral flexibility, an adaptation to new information. So what I call, where we talked about emotion, in each side of these states or the version of you, the dominant emotion is what I call the driver. That driver changes the state or version of us, okay? So if we are sad, okay, that is a sad version of us or a sad state. Well, what's our language? What's our beliefs? What's our attitudes? What's our values? What do we make decisions from if the world is sad? Do you think we're going to make the highest level decisions about culture or about a family or about business or about anything? No. So the dominant emotion inside of that is sad. So what if we are happy, right? Just using these basic emotions, but happy, right? We start to perceive the world very differently. And when we understand that we take in over 2 million bits of information through our 5 senses every single second, it's too much for our conscious mind to handle. So it has to go through a filter system in our brain. So it goes through, it bounces off the programs that are automatically there in our unconscious mind or subconscious mind or our body mind, all right, or habits and behaviors. And then what we perceive in the outside is literally, listen to this stat, and I'm sure you know this, Angelo, but we actually only perceive 134,000 bits of information from over that 2 million. So what does that mean? Does that mean the rest of the world's disappeared? No, it means it exists. It's just our perception around it. And then what happens is our brain, there's a part of our brain called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons replicate whatever we are around the most. And so and this is going back to social media and how people are inputting and creating identities. But if we were to look at this example, if you watched horror films every day for a month, now I'm not suggesting you do this, but if you did, right, every single day, how do you think you would be thinking by the end of that month? Well, you'd be thinking quite strange, right? If you watched everything about a high performer, or using Ray Dalio as the example we used before, if you watched every interview he's done over a course of the month, how would you be thinking more about trading or investing at the end of that month? Right, you'd be thinking very differently. The brain adapts to whatever we are dominantly inputting. This is through it could be imagery in our own head, the thoughts, it could be books, it could be audios, it could be social media, it could be TV. But whatever imagery is going in, it starts to build patterns. What our brain wants to do to serve neural energy, what it wants to do is it wants to delete, distort, or generalize all this information to make habits, easy patterns, so it can live life, so it can conserve this energy. So if we're inputting conspiracy theory or all this craziness that's out there these days, then your brain starts to see the world that way, which gives you what you're talking about before is a confirmation bias. Then you start to see the world a very different way to a reality, or you start to perceive yourself a certain way and not the truth. Where I really believe the old school business people and existing founders, they really didn't have this external factor the same way. So what they would do is business is the ultimate self-reflecting tool. It's the biggest growth tool that we can have, right? Because it puts you under so much intense pressure. It expands you past boundary after boundary after boundary. And we test ourselves. So how the brain and the nervous system works is what I talk about conditioning. We hit level after level of growth. It's like a muscle. The muscle gets bigger, thicker, and stronger as we put ourselves under more and more pressure. But the challenge is, with today's world, there's often a way that the younger generation don't want to handle that pain and pressure. So they look for escape mechanisms. They look for ways, fight, flight, or freeze response, right? Well, they flight. So they'll look for shiny object syndrome, or they'll look for shiny objects and then develop a syndrome. But then they'll look for ways to escape this growth. I'm ranting on there, Angelo, but hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, you said a couple of things I want to follow up on. Potentially the importance of good habits and routines that probably need to be adapted as, again, new information comes in, new information on our body, our brain, on what's around us. So just because I had a routine 12 and a half years ago doesn't mean it's necessarily the best routine for me now. It may also have become too easy for me. And could I make the argument that some level of stress, like you said, if I'm lifting weights and I want to be a 1977 Arnold Schwarzenegger, I need to challenge. I just came back from Austria, so I'm thinking of Arnold. I need to challenge my muscles with a routine that is going to be very stressing. It's going to, and that's how I grow. Now, I'm not saying the brain is perfectly aligned per se with muscles like that, but to some degree, probably, we need new inputs of information that is going to be the right inputs. And some of what we learned in the past may not be applicable moving forward. In other words, do we need to challenge and stress ourselves? Not to the point where we're not sleeping and we're worried every second of the day, although that may be a bit of a different subject. But we can't just coast by. Like we need to do things that are somewhat stressful. Going out there in the world, meeting new people, building companies, working and committing to an employer. This is not always fun, but we have to do it. Therefore, how do we overcome, I may go back to that word anxiety. How do we overcome and how do we challenge ourselves to set goals, to adapt our habits and routines, to constantly work on getting better, not staying static or the same?
I love it. I love it. And this goes back to your people talk about purpose and all the rest of it, and that's fine. I talk about missions. What mission are you going on, right? And this could be a 5-year mission. It could be a 12-month mission. It could be a 3-month, it could be a day. But what are we doing? Because mission engages the correct emotion. And we want to actually win in this mission. But what we need, what you're talking about there is something which I teach called personal optimization. I really believe that the inner world creates the outer world. And especially when I look at high performance athletes, it really is defined. And we can talk about the visualization aspect, and people talk about visualization, but they don't really understand what that means. The language of the brain is the visual component, right? So it's visuals, it could be a movie, it could be a picture, it's self-talk, it could be the camera angles inside of that movie. Do you know, Angelo, that there's 64 components that actually structure a memory? And when we start to understand that, then, and we understand that we've got billions of experiences and billions of memories. And the more we repeat them, the more the neuroplasticity kicks in and starts to form those again into habits. So it becomes very easy, very quickly to get stuck in a certainty or a comfort zone. So I have a rule for myself. If I'm still doing exactly the same thing as I was last week, I'm not growing, right? Yes. You wouldn't expect a professional athlete to not be constantly in training camp advancing their skill set, right? So why do people think this in business? I don't know, because business is constantly adapting and changing. And even if we talked about like becoming the best version of us as a human being, we want to be constantly adapting and changing. Because otherwise what happens is the brain, and this is for like health and longevity. If we are not constantly growing internally, then what happens to the brain? It's like a muscle on the outside. It gets atrophy. It's called pruning in the brain. So what happens is the brain literally starts to shut down. And if we are not motivated to take action, then we are not constantly creating dopamine, and dopamine receptors will start to shut down. So what does that mean? Well, Parkinson's, things like that happen. And what happens is people work so hard in the business world. People work so hard. And what is the point if we're constantly redlining ourselves? If we're like a car redlining, we get burnout. And when we get burnout, unfortunately, the brain and the nervous system, it's never quite the same. It's like we get a wound, and that wound has a scar, and that scar is sensitive. So what happens is if we're not taking care of ourselves along the journey, it's like a high performance vehicle, right? You wouldn't expect to drive a Bugatti, right? Or whatever your flavor is, and not do maintenance on it, not take it in for checks, not learn how to drive it, right? The correct way, not learn how to drive it at speed. But for some reason, because business world is so externally focused, they lose these tools. They don't, they think they know the brain. But what's the truth behind adapting or personal optimizing ourselves? Well, let me look at it this way. What's the real return on investment behind 10% more focus, or 10% more creativity, or 10% more drive, or 10% faster decision making, or an extra 2 IQ points? What does that do in this ever evolving, changing world? Because this younger generation, they're very competitive, just the same as the older generation. I'm old too, but this older generation, we're competitive, you know? So if we're not staying ahead, then what happens is this younger generation are going to catch up and overtake. And that's what you'll find. So when I've worked with like people like billionaires all the way down to whoever, the people that succeed are the people that aren't really necessarily focused on money. What they're focused on is the mission. That's what I was going back to. It's building that business. It's building what they love. It's growing something. And when that happens, well, they're fulfilled. And if you look at the blue zones are the areas of the world where have the longest life of people. What they're doing is they're socially interacting. They're enjoying themselves in life. And my whole point is when I work with executives and people, it's like you can push. And I've been through like all of this before in my own life when I was younger, pushing too hard. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. But when people push and push and push and push and push and push and push, it's like you're redlining your Bugatti, and that's it. It's going to burn out. So back to your point in your question, why must we constantly evolve and grow and get better? Well, there's biological consequences if we do not, right? There's biological consequences. And even inside your organization, I call it your an ecosystem. Whether it's the ecosystem of, it could be, look at it this way. You've got the founder, and the founder does what? Well, the founder leads the vision. The managers dictate the vision. The team move the vision. And the family, well, they get the ripple effect from the vision, right? And do you know that did you know this, Angelo, or anybody listening? The stress hormone is contagious. It's contagious through your sweat glands, right? Cortisol. So your hormones, mirror neurons in your brain, the unconscious behaviors. So if you are a founder or running big teams, or even the leader of a family, if you're constantly stressed out, which you could call anxiety, old school, we call it stress, right? Whatever you want to call it. But that is actually has a ripple effect through the whole ecosystem. So what it means is performance does too. Happiness does too. The same beliefs, values, language, attitude, vision, culture, that has a ripple effect. So if we want to perform our business to perform its best, or family to perform at its best, then we have to take personal responsibility for what we are thinking, feeling, and acting inside of us, because that can create success, or it can create devastation. And that's where my passion comes from, Angela.
Wow, that was a masterful answer. Thank you. Going back to what I said earlier about executive function, I guess related to that is an aspect of it that has gained prominence over the last 2 decades, what we define as emotional intelligence, which I guess to me involves mastering feelings around better dealing with stress and life's ups and downs, as well as focusing on what matters and making sound decisions, which comes back to some of the questions that I led into asking and some of your responses. Now, let me live up a little bit to the title, Neuro Performance Secrets for the Rising Generation. We laid a framework and the challenges they face and how it's going to be on them to overcome. And by the way, my generation, much older, I want you to be successful because one, it's selfish. It's going to be to the betterment of me. Two, I have a son that fits into the Generation Z, and I care about the world. And I care about, forget the future for me, the future for my bloodline, my child, and what comes after that. So for me, I want to do everything I could to mentor, to share, to also learn. Of course, there's much I can still learn.
Always.
Even from Generation Z, although sometimes it's a little frustrating, but there are certain things I can learn there. So living up to that title, what, now that they have the framework, what are some things they could actively do to, even if it's get 1 or 2% better, how do they know to identify stress? Sometimes it could be an advantage, fight or flight. It could motivate and push. And, you know, maybe one thing that I'll lead with, the amount of time that the young ones often spend, back to what we said earlier, on social media, primarily the 2 platforms that I noted, maybe Snapchat will be a third. It's shocking. And I can't believe that there's a lot of good that's coming from that. Our brains are not that evolved over just the last 15 years versus relative to how we've been living for a long, long, long time. How could the young ones just be more disciplined? Maybe, you know what, don't spend 4 hours on the phone looking through social media and scrolls all the day, which is probably misinformation and probably looking to manipulate your mind and make you kind of part of the system anyway. We could get into that maybe if we don't want to get into it a little bit later.
I'd love to. And you bring up such powerful questions. And whether it's a parent listening to this or whether it's a, say, next gen or whoever listening to this, because you've got such a big audience and a wide audience, it's what happens is dopamine goes in, as I was saying before, goes in spikes and it goes in troughs, right? It goes in highs and it goes in lows. And that's the big chemical that I want people to take away. What dopamine actually does for it, it is the motivation chemical. So the first thing that you've got to understand is what most people do, unfortunately, and I remember back in the past, I did this, but it's what do most people do? How fast do they get on social media in the morning? Do you know what I mean?
Sometimes literally as soon as they wake up.
Sometimes as soon as they wake up, right? So what happens when they wake up? Their nervous system, understand this, what's happening inside of them, first of all. And this is what people need to understand. We're interrupting patterns here. How you interrupt the pattern is you look at what thought or what feeling is happening right now. That's the best way to do it. So we're activating what you use very, very prominently is the prefrontal cortex, the decision making, right? So this is your self-talk, to put it in layman's terms, right? So we can, in performance, we can actually use self-talk to navigate our focus. And this is also a way to interrupt patterns in the moment, right? So what thoughts am I feeling right now? Most people don't even take that time to check in that because, again, we're externally focused. So people wake up in the morning, and when we understand what I was talking about before with the brain, the limbic system and the filter system in the brain, we can only handle so many things. Actually, the filter, consciously, we can only handle about 3 to 5 things at once, right? And ultimately, one thing at one time, but 3 to 5 things at once before we become overloaded. So what happens is people wake up in the morning, they're not taking a conscious awareness of themselves. So instantly they feel overwhelmed because their brain is looping on all the things they got to accomplish that day. Each one of those things is unknown because that's life. Welcome to life. It's unknown, right? So what happens is is they try to take control. So the nervous system in that moment is in sympathetic. Sympathetic means we are amped up, right? Parasympathetic means we are in rest and digest, but also calm, right? Their brain wave, if we want to go into brain waves, the brain wave is in something called high beta. So that's anxiousness, right? So, and we don't know what you've been dreaming about. And we also don't know what you've been putting in your head before you slept, which was also building patterns. And so who knows what you were watching, probably social media before you went to bed. So you have all these crazy thoughts in your head, you go to sleep. Well, guess what? Your nervous system's being jacked up. So as soon as you wake up, you're already in an amygdala response, a fight or flight response, right? So people then, instead of taking this internal focus, they go external, social media. So what we must do then is understanding the brain works like a muscle or like a muscle. And so that's where we must develop these simple routines or patterns. Let's take charge of how we're thinking, feeling, and acting right there in the moment, okay? So first of all, we can do very simple stuff. Let's give you one example, right? Because everyone talks about breath work and all of these things, and that sounds a bit woo-woo.
I was going to get to that.
Yeah, it sounds a bit woo-woo, right? So let's talk about some tech, right? Because I'm all about part of what I do with brain chemistry and nervous systems is we introduce tech and supplementation and stuff, besides the psychology component. So what that means is that we could literally start controlling our brainwave. So if you used there's many different apps. I use very specific apps, but it's if we use something called binaural beats, for example, we're not using neurofeedback machines, but binaural beats, very, very simple. They're everywhere, right? You just got to make sure that actually the brainwave frequencies and not just like a noise, right? So binaural beats hits both sides of the hemispheres and creates a spike, right? That creates a brainwave. What we want to be doing is literally putting these earbuds in and setting it to alpha or theta and just spending 5 to 10 minutes lying in bed. What that's going to do is that is just going to drop our brainwave into, well, out of high beta, out of anxiety, right? If you just did that one thing, I can show you many other things, but if you just did that one thing every day that takes 10 minutes, suddenly the impulse to search for dopamine or something external outside of us changes. What does that mean then? Like I was talking about before, the emotion is what I call the driver to our state or version of us or perspective of the world. So suddenly we are not anxious. So we are now calm. So now being calm, what's our view of the world? Well, suddenly what's our belief of the world, ourselves? What's our attitude to getting things done? How do we talk to ourselves, right? So suddenly we start interacting with the world very, very differently from that one simple thing, right? In the mornings, then that feeling becomes really addictive, right? Because it feels really good. To get out of bed and actually be calm and not frantic feels really good. To not go on social media and start hammering it through and then come off social media and still be full of anxiety and stress, because it doesn't solve anything. It's just a way that the amygdala, again, it's a flight response. It's a way to escape the moment or those feelings, right? So that's one thing that we can start to do to take control or charge of our own internal world first thing in the morning.
Wow, I think that's fantastic. I mean, actually, I'll share a little bit of, and I do adapt it and change it, but some of the things that I do, and let me know if it fits into your personal experience as well. I do think that there's a level of science to this, and it's been proven, but also there's a percentage, like many things in life, that is art. We're all individuals, we're all different. Not everything needs to be 100% proven. There is some degree of faith, and to some degree, we create our own reality in our mind. And our capability of how we think is really probably the only true thing that we really control.
It's true.
There's an event.
That's true, Angelo.
You don't control every event. You do control your response to it, and that helps to determine the outcome. Yes. So for me, I think it's important. I do use the word purpose to kind of be the purpose, have goals and have goals that are aspirational.
Yes.
I generally find more successful people, there are exceptions to this, I get it. Generally, more successful people, in my experience, tend to get up very early.
Yes.
It's just me. And I'm not saying I'm natural at it. I'm not. Trust me. They tend to do a little bit of, maybe it's Wim Hof breathing, maybe it's meditation, maybe it's TM, maybe it's a level of gratitude. So there's various ways of doing that. It's trendy lately to do intermittent fasting and no breakfast, maybe just coffee or a green tea. I'll leave that up to you. But I think what you eat, supplements you take, and your workout routine, I do think that is important. It makes you feel better about yourself. It's kind of a little bit, honestly, hard to be stressed when you're focused on your goals and you're committed to your body, your working out, your health, the gift that you have of life that I think is important.
Absolutely.
The important thing for me, and I don't think I'm saying anything new here, and you did hint at it, is I don't try to, when I'm ready for work, whether that's 7:30, 8 or 8:30, I don't focus on a million different things. I often reprioritize every day as to what's the most important thing for me to do. And I think for me, I'm most alert in the morning. Let me put my phone on mute, not pay any attention to social media. Maybe I only do that 2 or 3 times a day at somewhat allocated times so it doesn't interfere. But for me, now I'm hitting noontime and I feel good. I got up early. I had a focus of gratitude. I focused on my big problem that I put my main energy into. I didn't get distracted. And I feel like I have a little bit of a sense of, I got a lot of things done. I made my bed. I made it so beautifully. Like little things like that begin to become habits, and habits become routines. And then that leads to behaviors, and that leads to the actions that we should take. Now, again, I started the interview. I do work with family office families and executives primarily on some of these things. I believe practically every family office executive could be great. They could be incredible. They could be the LeBron James, the name a great, you would call it football, I would call it soccer. Player. Messi. Now, in reality, to be Messi in soccer, you need innate talent that is fostered at a young age. But the world of the family office and business is actually not quite that competitive. You actually could go from mediocrity to greatness. And I think you could actually do it moderately quickly if you put in the dedication. Now, imagine if you're young, if you have the opportunity to be a sponge, to learn, to have great mentors around you, to develop good habits, to not get addicted to alcohol and drugs and crap like that, that is not going to do anything for you, to develop healthy habits, to be disciplined. Like, you're going to want to go out and have fun, and sometimes you have to, I get it. But maybe in your 20s, and maybe I could talk from the experience as a male, because that's what I am. You have to make sacrifices. You can't go out all the time. Look what Gary Vee said. He sacrificed his 20s, barely having fun and going out, too extreme. I'll agree with that. But he formed his competency that allowed him to grow into himself and become very, very financially successful.
Absolutely.
I went on a little bit of a rant there. I'm sorry.
No, it's great. It's great, Angelo. It's great.
I'm going to allow you maybe.
I love it. I love it. And I want to get to know you even more just by that. It shows me so much of your version of reality, because you apply this stuff, and that's great, man. And you help other people. And yes, we can fine tune even that, but that's why I talk about personal optimization. And it's great that you do all of those things, because that is, once you start heading down those paths, right? And it feels so good because you feel better, right? You feel better. And when you start feeling better, you want to do more of it. And it's like, what I always talk about, I always use sports analogy because I've grown up doing martial arts, right? So I was a competitive fighter all my life and things like that. And back in the day when I take a professional, I take an amateur athlete, an amateur fighter, for example, take them to win, then I take them to be a professional, then I take them to being a world champion, right? Well, that is a steep learning curve. It's a steep growth curve, and it requires, like everything, discipline, right? So to wake up in the morning and do, like you say, the routines, morning routines are very important, and also work to home routines, and also evening routines, because we're completing the loop in the brain. And whatever we're trying to do in the mornings, it's very easy not to do it. Yeah, the people who are the outliers, it's kind of good to model, right? It's like you talk about the Gary V's, who are the extreme outliers. Talk about the Messis, who are the extreme outliers. But it's also, if we understand that we might not become the outlier, but if we head towards being them, then we're going to adopt habits and behaviors very, very similar to them. And that's only going to benefit us, right? But again, it's very easy. The world, society is a business. And the business is very designed to take your money. And the money is also your time, effort, and energy. It's designed to take your focus, right? But yet the people who live the happiest lives, the most fulfilled lives, the most content lives, are the people that take all of that energy back from society and from the external, and they bring it internal. And so when you say in the mornings, you narrow your focus down to that one thing. You wake up and you do, like we're talking about, the breath work and all of these things. It's like we're tapping in to our actual human genetics, right? And that's what we've done for hundreds of thousands of millions of years, or depends what your belief is. But and when we tap into those primal parts of ourselves, it's like we can use the body right, okay? That also gets rid of stress hormones by actually exercising. And then the modern bit of our brain, which we've spoke about many times, is the prefrontal cortex, that we're still really working out how to use these things. But if we can understand that, if we can develop these basic routines, then what happens is, and the emotion drives us, so we best be in control of what emotion is driving our behaviors and habits so we can communicate. Then what happens is, with the next gen, well, that is very much easier to understand their parents or the original founders' version of reality, because you're not reacting to your own emotion or believing that your own belief system is the only belief system in the world, because it's not, right? The people who created those multi-billion-dollar businesses, well, they knew a thing or two, right? That's how they got there. So their version of reality is very valid. We can learn from that just as much as they can learn from the new generation. And what if we can understand that both of those worlds or those belief bubbles are very, very valid, then what we can do is synergize what beliefs are in similar, or at least we can understand different perspectives, and then we can actually create a new version or model of business and reality, where both cultures or both worlds are seeing the same future, right? And when we can do that, that's how we harmonize, or what we call homeostasis, inside the body. But we can create homeostasis inside of a family. We can create homeostasis inside of a business. We can do all these things. Again, that's what I do for executives. That's what I do for families. That's what I do for traders. That's what I do for hedge funds. That's what I do for VC companies. And I make people the best version of themselves, so they can live the life that they choose to live, whatever that is.
I love it. I mean, when I hear you talk, it almost sounds like which is a compliment, the great show Billions, the Windy Road psychologist that makes the great $1 billion investor even better. If you just get a little better every year, those increments really, really add up. I guarantee you there's not a big difference sometimes between someone you see who's incredibly successful at a given craft and you. It may be similar IQ, similar height and looks, whatever it may be. Like, don't play the victim. I hate when the younger people do that. Here's a saying, I'm going to have to clean it up a little bit for YouTube, and I'm going to probably mess it up a little bit. But basically, weak people think the world is against them. Strong people, and I know those are both careful terms to use, strong people don't care if it is. They still move forward. I agree there are probably elements and forces against you, whatever it might be. Maybe you're short, maybe you think it's this, it's that, the wrong parents, but you can't change that. You can be the best version of yourself. Do not play the victim. Develop capacity and capability to be competent and show some level of discipline. Actually, the number one trait when I study billionaires and do my research, and I'll give the final word to you in a second, it probably is what some would define broadly as being conscientious, meaning thorough, meticulous, hardworking, which is diligent and efficient, well organized, punctual, ambitious, and persevering, meaning tenacious. Let me tell you, everything I just said under the auspice of being conscientious, all those traits, they are not necessarily inherent. You could learn to do those things. You could learn to be more methodical. You could learn to be more tenacious and persistent. Yeah, there may be some biological factors that play into it a little bit, but for the most part, this is a decision that you make. On that note, we did have so many more things to cover, things like reasoning, which is fluid intelligence, planning, which is also fluid intelligence, inhibitory or inhibition control and all that things for a part 2. But if I had to give you 3 minutes in terms of to wrap it up and the work that you do and how you help athletes, rising generation family members, entrepreneurs, business people, VCs, talk a little bit about kind of wrapping up our conversation and what you do and how people could learn more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I've loved, by the way, I've loved today. This has been really fun. What I do is I condition on an athlete's point of view, but let's talk about, it could be F1, but let's talk about VC companies, hedge funds, let's talk about the finance world, but also let's talk about family offices, because that's why we're here. What I do is something called personal optimization. Personal optimization is split into 2 different categories. It's split into peak performance and it's split into personal advisory, okay? So peak performance is where we look at with business, get the business ROI. It splits into 3 different categories: the mind, the nervous system, and neurochemistry. The mind is where we use modalities like neuro-linguistic programming, which I'm a world-class expert at, behavioral psychology, all of these different things, including persuasion and influence, right? Tech, or the nervous system, is where we introduce tech. This is neurofeedback, photobiomodulation, heart coherence, these things. And then we look at neurochemistry, where we can introduce nootropics, we bring in doctors, we look at the supplementation, the blood work, we can do all of that stuff. So that's for peak performance. The other side of it is what I call personal advisory. And you touched on that with the EQ side, right? This is where we're creating fulfillment and optimization at home and in business, right? Because I really believe with this ecosystem, whether it's founders, managers, teams, or families, right? We all need a safe space to drop their identity, right? So they can speak about personal matters. So you can open up and unlock blue ocean thinking. So you can discuss stresses, emotions, changes in perspective, right? We can unload depression or personal issues or tactics, or even with families, we can have a safe space to be truthful about succession, fears, and self-sabotage. So when we look at personal optimization, I split it into those 2 different areas, and that really covers anybody in any world who is a true high performer. Because what I cannot do is give people motivation, right? What I can do is fine tune anybody on the planet from any level to be the best and ultimate version of themselves. And that's my passion. This is what I've done for 21 years. And I'm just getting started.
Yeah, you said something that's a bit of a pet peeve of mine in a good way, because you have the same attitude. I like it. I hate when people, and again, I'm trying to clean it up and being a little politically correct. I hate when people say, oh, you're fine just as you are. Go and, you're going to get the the spouse or the loved one of your dreams. You're going to become a billionaire. You're going to get this job. You're just fine as you are. No, you're not. You're likely not good enough. It gets a little better. Relax. Don't get mad, audience. You're not the best version of yourself that you could be. If you show a level of, I want to be great, I'm willing to be disciplined, I'm willing to learn what that's going to take. And I know that's not going to happen in a day, probably won't even happen in a week, a month, or a year. But I'm willing to take that first step. The best way to eat an elephant is simply one bite at a time. So no, do not be satisfied. Don't listen to your friends who tell you you're good enough as you are. You're probably not. You're not the best version of yourself. I know that's a kick in the pants to some of you. I'm just telling you the reality of how it is. Andy, if you disagree, you could yell at me.
No, I agree 100%. Because, I just to add on to that before we wrap up, because I value everyone's time and especially yours, Angelo. If you were already the best version of you, you would have already achieved the result that you wanted, right? That's the truth.
It's the harsh truth. And it's okay to have a harsh truth.
Yes.
It should put the cold water on your face and realize there's things you could do to be the best version of yourself. Andy, and I think the work you're doing is amazing. I highly recommend people learn more and reach out. How could they learn more, either on a website, on social media, and how can they reach out to you?
The andymurphy.online is the website. And you can access my podcast there. You can reach out to me there. We've done over 2 million downloads. We've done over 400 episodes of the podcast and had a lot of world-class guests on. But really, let's just have a chat, because everyone's situation is so unique, so different. And I work with so many different types of people. All I do is we book in a time, we have a chat and see how I can help you, if I can help you. And we take
And one more time, Andy, either the website and or your email.
Andy Murphy, andymurphy.online or andy@andymurphy.online.
I've been a fan of some of Andy's material. I'm relatively new the last couple of months, but I loved it. I think it's intellectual, yet also it's down home, it's passionate, and you could tell he's a big advocate and is confident. I could argue there's no such thing as confidence because it can't be measured. He's competent. That could be measured. So I highly recommend you have an opportunity to reach out. Everyone on Angelo Robles, the Family Office TV, SFO Continuity, which is my private kind of mastermind and membership group, as well as Family Office Masterclass, where I teach the world practically 98% of what I know about the family office community and how to have a great family office. Most everything I do for now is under my brand. So my name as well, like Andy, AngeloRobles.com. I have a relatively unique name, so I was able to get the .com, thank God. That was a while back. I'm very active on social media, 2 YouTube platforms, Family Office TV and at Family Office. You could find me. If you're interested in learning more, wanting to be a part of the mastermind type groups and things that I do, you'll simply know how to reach me. But more important than me, definitely have an opportunity to learn more about Andy, have the opportunity to reach out. We will definitely have him back and do a deeper dive. I was a little crunched for time in about 1 hour today, but maybe we'll do 90 plus minutes the next time. It'll be a pleasure. Andy, thank you so much for the generosity of your time. Everyone have a great day. Thank you. Pleasure.